Hello everyone, Kristina Werner here. Strap in. This is a long video. We're going to go over 5 ways to use your Distress Oxide inks. Now, Distress Oxides are a little bit like a hybrid ink. You have the water reactive qualities of an original distress ink, but with the qualities that you might have in a pigment ink. There's opacity, it stays wet a little bit longer. There's a lot of really fun techniques you can do with oxides, and we're going to jump right into it. I'm starting out with Distress Resist Spray. This is a really unique product, and I want to tell you guys a little bit about it as I show you how I'm using it. Now, this is a permanent product, so you're going to want to only use it while it's contained within a box with some sides on it, because wherever you spray it, it's going to dry and stay. There's no solvents, there's nothing that you can put down that's going to take it off a surface. So if you want to protect your work area, and I'm sure you do, make sure you're using a box. So for this first example, I'm just spraying the Resist spray onto some white cardstock. This Resist spray dries completely clear. Make sure you wipe off the nozzle every time you use it, by the way. It dries clear, and it kind of almost has an embossed look. It's raised off the surface of the paper, and like the name suggests, it's going to resist any inks that you put on top. Now, it does dry fairly quickly, but just to be sure, I hit it with my heat tool just to make sure everything was dry before I moved on to inking. Now, you can use a bunch of different distress products on top of this Resist spray, but like the video title suggests, we are using Distress Oxide inks. I'm going to be using 5 different colors of inks today. I'm going to start out with Picked Raspberry. And I'm going to just be blending this onto my cardstock using a domed blending tool. So I'm blending this on, just trying to get a little bit of color on the corner. And do you notice that texture it's got up there? That is the Resist spray. Everywhere I put this ink, it's going to resist the color. It makes it kind of a slick surface, and that ink just slides right off. So I know what you're thinking. This is going to mean you can do some really fun techniques. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways, other ways besides this original way, to use this Resist spray with your oxide inks. Blending on more of these colors, getting those colors to blend a little bit. I think it almost looks like it could be a galaxy. If you wanted to take it one step further, you could blend black from the edges, and it would look really, really neat. Okay, so we're going to go into my second example. Before we apply the Resist spray, we're going to do the ink blending. So I will be showing additional ink blending here at the end of the video, so I'm not going to go into details too much, but basically I just want a layer of color to go underneath my Resist spray. So I have my initial blending, I put it in my box, and I'm going to use a stencil right over the top. And I'm going to spray my Resist spray, and it's only going to be applied where the openings in the stencil are. So this is going to give a really fun design right on top. Now, when you use a stencil, you want to take that immediately to water and clean off the stencil, because like I said, that Resist spray is permanent on whatever it sits on unless you wash it off immediately. So I took that to my sink and I rinsed it off very quickly and then came back to my project. Now I'm taking those same colors and I'm just adding additional blending. You can see that it emphasizes that design where I sprayed the Resist spray. So the color and the blending underneath those dots is what's showing through. And then I have these new colors blended on top. It gives a really cool tone-on-tone double effect. Really, really neat. So in order to wipe off all that oxide ink that's on the surface of the Resist spray, just wipe it with a cloth, and you'll see that it just brightens up all those areas because it's taking that ink off the Resist spray. So such a fun and cool technique. Okay, so for my third idea with Resist spray, I'm once again starting with an ink blended background. Now, I love this blend. I'm going to show you how I did it at the very end of the video, so stay tuned. This color combination is killer. I love it so much. Making sure everything's dry before I move on to the resist spray. And this time I'm going to be using a really tall star stencil. And I'm going to apply a little bit of pixie spray behind the stars. It's going to help me get a better crisp image. So there's a little bit of pixie spray on the stencil, pressed it down onto my paper, and I'll bring in that box once again. I'm going to tell you a third time, make sure you use a box with resist spray. You want to protect your work area. Wipe off that nozzle, and then I'm going to take the stencil immediately to my sink and rinse it off with water. It does come off the stencil easily with just rinsing it, but it won't come off at all if you let it dry. So I let the resist spray dry onto my paper, and now I'm going to come in with black soot. Now you might be thinking, what are you doing to that beautiful background? But trust me, it's a really cool technique. I'm blending the black over the entire area of my project. And the area with the stars is going to resist the black ink. And you're left with this really cool effect where you have the color underneath kind of glowing through the black. And then you have the star pattern on top where the color is a little bit brighter. So I'm going to hit this with a paper towel just to take off any of the oxide ink on top of that resist spray, and everything just gets brighter and brighter as I buff off that ink. It's a really cool effect, and I'm going to finish up this piece at the end of the video and you can see how it turns out. But I love that you can still sort of see the blend underneath that black, and then you can see the color coming through on the stars. Really, really fun technique. So here are the 3 examples using resist spray with oxide inks. All right, we're moving on. We're going to use some Distress microglaze. This is such a fun technique. I was blown away by it. Now, normally I use microglaze to protect and waterproof my envelopes that I design. But when you use it on top of glossy cardstock, in this case, alcohol ink cardstock from Tim Holtz and Ranger, you have a really cool effect. You're not going to believe your eyes. You've got to see it to believe it. I'm starting out by putting a slick surface out for me to blend on. I wanted something a little bit larger for my area. I'm using some different colors of Distress ink. I've got Squeeze Lemonade, Lucky Clover. I'm just smushing these onto this slick surface. I've got Prize Ribbon. It's the latest color of Distress. And I've got Wilted Violet. And then I'm going to bring in just a little bit of Picked Raspberry to round out this sort of rainbow selection of Distress Oxide inks. So now I'm going to spray the inks with water. This is a Distress sprayer. And then I'm going to press my glossy cardstock face down into my ink. I'm pressing it down. I'm going to wiggle it around, get the colors moving. And then I'm going to lift up quickly. And I have a cool water effect from all of those inks. Now you'll notice that the color, even right now, it has almost like a chalky look to it. That's a feature of Distress Oxide inks. That's very common to have sort of a chalky film over your blending. It's very apparent on glossy cardstock. In fact, it comes off on your fingertips a little bit. So what I'm going to show you today is how you can waterproof the area so the chalkiness doesn't come off, but it also has a really cool effect. So after I dried that initial layer of color, I then pounced it back into those droplets of color, adding additional color on top, and it's almost like these colors sit on top of each other. That's part of the opaque kind of properties of oxide inks. So I've got more of that Picked Raspberry. I'm just adding more of that color right on top. And I'm going to dry this with my heat tool to stop the color from moving around much more. Kind of wanted it to stop there. And then I'm going to take some of that Wilted Violet and add purple to the other end. I just wanted a little more of that purple shade. And I'll hit that with my heat tool to dry it as well. So here's my finished kind of ink smushing technique on glossy cardstock. You could definitely leave it like this. It looks beautiful. I'm going to show you a couple more examples, and then I'll show you what the Distress Microglaze does. You kind of have to have your project finished before you use the microglaze. So I've got squeezed lemonade, picked raspberry, seedless preserves, and abandoned coral. Do the same steps, smush that down, tap off some of that water that was dripping off and collecting in the corners. And I'll hit this with my heat tool until it's dry. Then I'm going to pounce it back into the color, pick up more of those colors, and get a really cool effect. These backgrounds definitely look like they have been wet at some point. All that water. It looks really, really neat. It almost has an alcohol ink look to it, but we're using oxide inks. It's really fun. All right, so I'm going to pounce that into seedless preserves again and dry it. And then I'm going to pounce it in. I think I'm going to leave it at this point. Yeah, I think I'll leave it here. I'm going to set that aside, clean off my surface, and do one more. I'm using prize ribbon. I've also got seedless preserves. And then I'm using a little bit of picked raspberry. I'm going to spray that with my water and then put that glossy cardstock face down into the ink once again. Now I'll lift up, and this is definitely a pink and blue look. I'm going to hit this with my heat tool to stop the colors from moving much more. And then I'm going to add a little bit more seedless preserves. I'm just going to add that on that pink end, a little bit down onto the blue as well, and then hit that with my heat tool. All right, so now I've got these three backgrounds. They're all very chalky looking. Like, really take note of that chalk look. I'm going to bring in that microglaze, and you will not believe how it changes the look of these. I'm going to apply the microglaze with a mini round blending tool. And what this is going to do, you can use your fingertips, but this saves your fingers from getting too messy. And watch what it does. It's like it just adds water to the surface. And as you buff it in, it gets more and more intense. Look how different that looks. It's kind of amazing. It brings out all those under layers of color. I couldn't really see the yellow and the green before, but now they're coming out so vibrant. Look at the difference between those two sides. It's just adding microglaze on top. So the microglaze serves a couple purposes when you're applying it on top of oxide ink that's been applied to glossy cardstock. The first attribute that it offers, which it does on no matter what cardstock you're using, is that it makes the surface water resistant. It's going to lock in your ink, make sure that it doesn't slide around at all on the paper after the fact. And if it ever has any moisture added to it later, it will help it not ruin your project. The other thing it does is the microglaze seeps into that glossy cardstock and it changes the intensity of the oxide ink. Takes away all of that chalkiness. I'm using a paper towel to buff off the excess of that microglaze, and I'm left with this really intense background. Do you remember what it looked like before? It was so chalky. So here's another chalky one. I have not applied the microglaze yet, and I'm applying it now, and it just brings out all of that color. It's so, so neat. I had never seen this technique until Tim Holtz showed it at a trade show, and I was like, wait, what? What is going on now? It's one of those techniques that you don't believe it until you see it. It's really fun. I hope you guys give it a try. It's another way to stretch those oxide inks and get a really different look. So I'm buffing off the excess. All right, so this one's all done. I'm going to go on to that third one. Once again, very chalky texture, almost a pastel look. And then as I apply the microglaze, it's like it just brings that intensity of color back. Look at that prize ribbon color. It just brightens right up. It's as if it's a cloudy day and adding microglaze clears the clouds and the sun can come through. It's a really fun technique. Okay, so I'm going to be using a background made with microglaze in a card at the end of the video. But for now, I'm going to show all three of these on camera for you to see. They turned out beautiful, and they really do sort of look like alcohol ink backgrounds. They don't look like just regular oxide ink. It's so interesting. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a third way to use your Oxide inks, and that is watercolor stamping. I've got two different background stamps to work with. I'm starting with the solid grid background from Simon, and I'm going to apply my inks directly onto this red rubber stamp. I've got a few different colors, kind of the ones I've been using a lot for this video. Picked raspberry, squeezed lemonade, and you'll notice that I get a little bit of pink ink on my yellow ink pad here. It's not a huge deal. You can use a paper towel or a piece of paper to kind of dab that off the corner. And it looks like the color's still there, but it won't transfer when you use it again. Then I've got prize ribbon right above that squeezed lemonade. And then I'm going to put a little bit of wilted violet up in this top corner. So this is a really fun technique. You never quite know what you're going to get, but it's fun for kind of abstract backgrounds. And I apologize if you hear construction noise in the background here. I have a neighbor that's having their house worked on. But anyway, I sprayed my stamp with water, and then I'm putting some watercolor paper right onto that stamp and using my fingertips and walking it across the surface to transfer that color to my watercolor paper. This is some Strathmore watercolor paper, by the way. I'm going to take a spray bottle, my Distress sprayer, and I'm going to spray this one more time just to get the colors moving a little bit more. You never really know how much water you have on the surface of your stamp, and I didn't have quite enough for my liking, so I just added a bit more water right on top. Now I'm going to set this aside to dry, and you'll see it here in a minute, but as it dries, those colors sort of mix and meld even more. So when you're using an outline stamp, here's an idea for some Oxide watercolor stamping. I have the delicate outline flowers background, and I'm placing it in my MISTI. I've taken out the foam pad so that it can accommodate this thicker stamp. And I'm going to put my watercolor paper in there. And then I'm going to ink up my stamp in a very similar way to that first example, just applying it directly to the stamp. Started out with picked raspberry. I'm moving to squeezed lemonade. Once again, if any of that ink transfers to the ink pad, you can just wipe it off. I'm going to add some prize ribbon, such a nice blue shade. Just in that corner, you can overlap these a little bit. And then I'm going to have wilted violet at the bottom. Just want to make sure that all the areas of the stamp are coated in ink. I'm going to take my Distress spray bottle, and I'm going to spray both the cardstock or the watercolor paper and my stamp, just a nice spritz, and then swing the door of my MISTI over and press down with my fingertips. This is going to transfer all that color onto my watercolor paper and also give it kind of a blown out color effect. Look how pretty that is. Now, a lot of the detail on the stamp is lost when you do it this way. So I'm going to dry my watercolor paper with my heat tool. You could also just let it air dry. And then we're going to stamp it one more time. I'm going to put that back in my MISTI. My stamp is still on the door of my MISTI, so it's in the same position. And I'm adding more of those same ink colors on top. Now, they don't have to be in the same places. In fact, it's better if they're not, because you're going to get kind of two colors on top of each other. Gives it a really cool effect. So I'm adding on all four of those colors and then stamping down once again. Now, this is going to stamp just the outlines. Isn't that pretty? It adds the pink on top of the yellow and the purple on top of the purple, and you just get a really fun technique. It kind of looks like you've watercolored areas and then stamped the detail stamp as well. Inked up a couple more areas for the center of the flowers, and here we are. Adding a little more purple on this one flower in that bottom corner, and then my background is finished. Such a simple background, but really beautiful. I love how that turned out. Okay, so we've done our two watercolor stamping backgrounds. There's that first one, how it turned out. Isn't it so different from how it looked before? The colors just mix and meld. All right, so now we're going to go on to gel press or jelly printing. I have this 3x5 gel press block, and I'm going to take off the two protective acetate sheets. And then I'm just going to get to making a bunch of these prints. Starting out with picked raspberry, I'm applying it directly to the gel press block. And I've got squeezed lemonade coming in here in the center. And then for my last color, I'm going to grab prize ribbon. I'm going to use a brayer to kind of pick up those colors, move them off to my scratch paper on the side, and keep blending. So gel press is really, really fun. You'll find that when you start using it, you just keep going, and you have 5 million backgrounds to use. So I'm just going to walk you through a couple of the different things that I did with my little gel press. I've got squeezed lemonade. I'm applying it off here to the side, picking it up with my brayer, and then applying it to the gel press. Now I've got Lucky Clover. I'm going to do the same thing. Pick it up with my brayer, kind of apply it onto my gel press. And then finally, I've got prize ribbon. And I'm going to do the same thing. Pick up that color and move it onto the gel press. Now, it doesn't look like there's much ink on the gel press. But as you see, when I lift up here, there was actually quite a bit of ink. It looks much darker. Isn't that pretty? You get really cool kind of ombre look from that. I cleaned off my gel press and I'm going to try using a stencil. I have this Fading Heart stencil. I'm going to apply that prize ribbon oxide ink right over the top of the stencil. So it's going to only apply in the open areas on the stencil. So I'm just brayering that on, lifting the stencil, and then I can take that that print that I just did, put it right over the top, and now I have these hearts on top of that background. Such a fun technique. All right, moving on. Now we're going to apply directly to the gel press again with some different colors. I've got peacock feathers, mowed lawn, and then prize ribbon. So I'm just using the corner of the ink pad to add color. Now I'm taking the brayer and running it through and kind of moving the colors around and moving them off to the side, then brayering again. I'm not cleaning my brayer in between because you get really cool overlaps when you do it this way. Okay, so this background looks really, really cool. I'm going to apply a little more color to this one. I've got more of that mowed lawn, peacock feathers, and prize ribbon. And I'm going to do a second layer on this piece here. So I'm going to put that back down directly onto the gel press and then lift up. And it sort of has this double look to it. All right, using those colors again. I'm adding more. I'm adding a little bit of Lucky Clover to this one and some squeezed lemonade. Kind of the same idea that I did before, but just a few more colors involved. All right, I'm going to brayer over the top, just softening that, and then press my paper directly down onto the gel press, using my fingertips to transfer all of that color. And there we go, a little bit of that squeezed lemonade peeking out in that top corner. This gives such a cool technique. So now I'm using the large chevron pattern. Once again, I'm going to be applying ink through the stencil. Actually, I think I do this one a little different. I'm putting the ink down first. Then I'm going to put the stencil on top after I brayered it. So that just evens out the color on the gel press. Putting the stencil down and then putting my paper down on top. So this is going to give me the open areas once again. And then if you wanted to, you can put that pattern over the top of another one as well. And you have just a little bit of a lighter color. Cleaned off my gel press and we're moving on. We're going to do another background. This time I've got wilted violet and I'm bringing in some picked raspberry. And then I think I'm going to add some, oh, nope, just those two colors. Brayering across the top and then pressing my cardstock down. When you're using a gel press with your oxide inks, make sure you have lots of sheets of cardstock ready because this goes very, very quickly and you're going to get lots of really fun backgrounds to use. All right, I think I've got just one more to go, maybe two. I've got abandoned coral, mustard seed, and then I think I'm going to bring in a little bit of seedless preserves. Actually, it was picked raspberry, just for a little bit of color. I'm brayering in a couple different directions and then pressing my cardstock down and peeling that up. This one might be one of my favorite prints from this entire session. I think it looks so, so fun. All right, I'm going to do more colors. I've got Picked Raspberry, Wilted Violet, and Prize Ribbon. And then I'm going to brayer across in different directions, just trying to get different colors, mixing, and I'll press my paper down onto the surface of the gel press. This is a really fun way to use your Oxide inks because you can really stretch them and get different techniques. All right, so there we go. Oh my word, I keep going. I had so many. I'm letting you know, like you can really create a lot of backgrounds when you're using a gel press. All right, so I've got Abandoned Coral, Picked Raspberry, and Squeezed Lemonade. I'm just trying to get a really good blend between the three colors. All right, and I'll press that down onto my cardstock and lift up. And I have a really cool look for this one. All right, I think I have one more to go, and that really is the last one. I'm starting with Abandoned Coral, Picked Raspberry, and bringing in my brayer, layering those, and then I'm going to put that back down onto it. And press down and lift up. Okay, that's one of my favorite ones too. It makes me think of strawberry lemonade. So fun. Okay, so here are all of the backgrounds that I made with my gel press. I got through so many of these all in one session. So, so fun. Okay, so for the fifth thing you can do with your oxides, I alluded to this earlier, you can do some awesome ink blending. Oxides are beautiful for ink blending. And I'm going to walk you through some ink blends and give you some tips and tricks on getting the most beautiful blend. Some people struggle with blending, and I'm hoping some of these tips will help alleviate some of that frustration. So one thing that I've learned that makes ink blending so much easier is to make sure you have very juicy ink pads. When you buy your Oxide inks, go ahead and get that re-inker at the same time. Unlike the original Distress inks, which you can go quite some time without re-inking, Distress Oxides, they're just a very needy ink pad. It needs a lot of ink, and you're going to get the best results if you have a juicy ink pad. And the reason I mention that is because the more ink that you use for your blending, the easier it is to blend. It's sort of like, it's exactly this. You have a very dry surface. You're working on paper, on cardstock. It's very, very dry. And in order to get the paints to mix, I'm calling them paints because it's just easier to think about it in my mind. And you have a thick enough layer of ink, it's almost like an acrylic paint on top. You want really thick inks so that there's enough ink on the paper that it can mix with the color around it. So don't be afraid to add a lot of ink. Notice how there's a little bit of white paper peeking through that green right now. I'm adding more and more ink on top. In this case, Squeezed Lemonade. I want more and more of that color to fill in all of those white gaps. I want it to be nice and smooth, very thick layers of ink. And that is going to give me the best opportunity to blend. Another tip is that when you're blending two colors together, blend them so much that they create a third color in between. Don't try to cram too many colors into one small area, because then you won't have enough room to really blend the colors and have that third color in between. So don't be afraid to spread out your ink blending and go back and forth and back and forth. Like right now I'm applying Prize Ribbon, and I'm going to go ahead and apply Wilted Violet here at the end, but then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go back to the previous colors that I've been using and really get those blends between the colors. It also helps if you're using a blending brush. I find that they're a little bit more forgiving as opposed to blending foam, but blending foam does work awesome as well. So there's my blend. That was that one the same color combination that I showed earlier in the video. All right, so now I'm gonna start out with Squeezed Lemonade, and notice how far down I bring that Squeezed Lemonade. It's pretty far down onto the paper, into the middle. And now I've got KITSCH Flamingo, and I'm gonna blend this up And I really want to make sure that I get that kind of coral color in between. I want to create that third color. And that's going to ensure that I have a really good blend between these two colors. So often I see ink blends done where it's almost like it's just pink right next to yellow. There's no transition in between. So if you want a really seamless blend, make sure you go over that center area and try to get that third color. So now I have that coral color coming through a little bit more, and the blend is looking better than it did before. Bringing on some seedless preserves, adding tons of ink. I want lots and lots of ink on the surface of my paper so that I can blend it into the other colors. Taking that KITSCH Flamingo, and I'm going to walk that purple back a little bit. The wonderful thing about oxide inks is they are a little bit more opaque, so you can layer them on top of each other and get a more blended look, but also you can walk that color back. So that purple was really coming up into the pink, but I've added more pink on top and it's kind of walking it back. It's telling that purple to step back and let the pink have its day. Bringing in prize ribbon here at the bottom, and I'm blending that up into that purple. There's quite a bit of purple on my sheet of cardstock here, so I'm going to bring that blue up quite a bit and try to get that third color. We want like a very intense violet blue coming from that purple. All right, I'm going to come in and use my purple blender brush and blend that seedless preserves, bring a little more of that KITSCH Flamingo, and try to get those colors really, really blending. By the way, these are new blender brushes from Simon. They are sold in sets of 10, and they're great because the handles are colored. All right, so there's my second blend for an example. Cleaned off my work surface here, and now I'm going to do a more dark and dramatic blend, starting out with pine needles. And I'm going to bring the pine needles color down into the center of my cardstock quite a ways. Then I'm bringing in prize ribbon and putting that right over the top and trying to get those colors to blend. So Distress Oxides, because I do have so much ink on the surface of my paper, your fingertips will pull up the color. So I like to put just a little bit of Post-it tape or even a piece of cardstock underneath my fingers to hold that in place while I'm blending. I've now got walnut stain, blending it into that prize ribbon. And these colors really didn't want to blend at first, but just keep going back and forth and you can get them to blend. So I'm going to go back to prize ribbon, go over that area once again, try to get that brown and blue mixing. I'm adding more and more ink on top, trying to get that blend. And it starts to blend eventually. And it looks really, really beautiful. I love this blend. I was surprised. I wasn't sure if I'd like it, but I did enjoy it in the end. Okay, for this last color on the very end of my cardstock, I'm actually going to bring in black soot, and it's going to intensify that bottom area. And the brown sort of gets lost here as I start to bring in that black. So after I have my black kind of blended up, I'm going to go back to walnut stain and bring it in once again and try to add that brown back in. This is another example of how you can bring the color in and walk back any strong colors. Bringing in the walnut stain, getting that brown. And there we go. There's my blend from pine needles to prize ribbon to walnut stain to black soot. All right, so here are my 3 blends. So beautiful. 2 very bright and colorful ones and one that is more dramatic. So now we're going to go into, I'm going to show you 4 different cards made with my examples from today. I have my Resist Spray stars along with my ink blending, and I'm using the Shoot for the Stars die and also the, I think it's Magic Stars cluster or something like that. I'll have everything linked down below. I'm using some liquid glue from Simon to adhere the Shoot for the Stars die cut. I just used some holographic cardstock to cut out that grading. I'm placing that directly onto my background, and then I placed a bunch of the stars that I cut out of that blended piece of cardstock all around my grading in kind of the same color orientation where they would have been. And there's my card. Super simple after I have those 2 panels already completed. For my second card, I'm taking my gel press print and I'm trimming it down just so that it has a little bit of a white border along the outside edge. Using a T-square ruler and a craft knife to get a really good cut. And then I'm taking it and placing it inside my Misty Stamp Positioning Tool and using the All About You stamp set from Simon. I'm going to stamp the Adore You greeting, and I'm stamping it in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. It's a nice, stark black ink. I'll also stamp one of the hearts from the stamp set. I believe this the heart that I use is the larger heart. And I'll put that right below the Adore You. That finishes the card design, so I put it on some foam adhesive and then put it directly onto a white 5x7 card base. Super simple card. I didn't want to cover up that beautiful gel print. So for these last two cards, I'm going to do some die cutting. I've got the Nested Hearts dies from Simon. I'm going to cut out the center of this micro glaze piece. And I'm also going to use the small script 2 die set to cut out the words, Hey Love. I used the Simon Dot Runner on the back of my heart die cut, put that directly on the front of a white card base. And then I took 4 layers of the Hey Love dies. I just die cut it 4 times and I glued them all together and then adhered them using some liquid glue onto my heart. It's a very simple card, but it lets that background shine. These backgrounds are so beautiful. It hurts my heart to cover it all up. So I like doing more simple cards with them so that the backgrounds can really be the focus. All right, so there is another card. For the third card, I'm taking that watercolor background that I made with the Delicate Flowers background, and I've adhered it to a black card base with some foam adhesive. And then I'm taking the You Are Loved die set, and I die cut it in black and white cardstock and adhered it together. Forgive me, this is the 4th card, actually. Put some foam adhesive on the back of the greeting and then put it directly onto the card front. So here are all 4 cards that I've created using the 5 different ways that you can use Oxide inks. Hope you enjoyed this video. Go ahead and check out those Oxide inks. Like I mentioned before, get your re-inkers at the same time. Believe me, it's totally worth it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in another video very soon.